So here's the headline. Leaked planetary defense papers suggest that the government has been secretly watching interstellar object 3I Atlas for 20 years. Not months. Not since the public discovery date of July 21st, when amateur astronomers started picking it up in their backyard telescopes. 20 years. 2 decades of covert surveillance, classified tracking, continuous monitoring through systems that officially don't exist. And we have images. Structured emissions from 3I Atlas captured by satellites that aren't supposed to be operational, showing geometric patterns that natural comets simply don't produce. Before we go further, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this story has layers that we'll be unpacking across multiple videos. What you're about to see isn't speculation, it's documented, it's sourced, and it raises questions that nobody in official channels wants to answer. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to show you what exists, to present the evidence that's emerged, and to let you make up your own mind about what it means. But I will say this. After going through these documents, after analysing these images, after connecting the dots between programs that were supposedly theoretical and surveillance networks that were supposedly years away from deployment, I can't unsee what I've seen, and neither will you. Let's start with the basics. According to official records, 3I Atlas was discovered on July 21, 2024, by the 3I Atlas survey system in Hawaii. That's the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, a pair of telescopes designed to scan the sky for near-Earth objects and potentially hazardous asteroids. When 3I Atlas flagged this object, it was initially catalogued as just another comet. But within days, orbital calculations revealed something extraordinary. This wasn't a solar system comet. The trajectory was hyperbolic, the velocity too high, the orbital parameters all wrong for anything bound to the Sun. This was Interstellar. The third confirmed visitor from beyond our solar system. That's the public story. Discovery in July 2024. Immediate analysis. Growing fascination as the object's anomalies became apparent. But leaked documents tell a very different story. They suggest that US planetary defense systems had been tracking this object since at least 2004, that they watched it approach for 2 decades, that they monitored its trajectory, analysed its composition, documented its behaviour, all while maintaining complete operational security. No public announcements, no academic papers, no disclosure to the international astronomical community. Just quiet, continuous surveillance through a network of classified assets that most people don't even know exist. The program at the centre of this is called Cassandra. And if these leaks are accurate, Cassandra represents a level of space surveillance capability far beyond what's been publicly acknowledged. Now here's where it gets interesting. Cassandra isn't entirely classified, or at least it wasn't always. The concept was first presented publicly in 2005 at the 57th International Astronautical Congress in Valencia, Spain. An academic paper, peer-reviewed, published in the conference proceedings. The paper proposed a planetary defense architecture capable of detecting near-Earth objects at extreme distances, tracking them continuously through cislunar space, and maintaining what they called persistent custody via distributed sensor networks. At the time, it was presented as theoretical, a concept study, something that might be built in the future if funding became available and technology matured. The paper outlined sensor requirements, orbital mechanics considerations, data processing challenges. It was thorough, detailed, technically sophisticated, but it was labelled as a proposal, not a description of operational capability. Now, 20 years later, we have leaked images from November 2025 showing data headers that reference Cassandra, Oracle 4, Argus VIS, and Umbra 3C. These aren't theoretical concepts anymore, these are operational systems, and they were apparently watching 3I Atlas long before anyone outside classified channels knew it existed. Let me walk you through what we know about these systems, separating what's publicly confirmed from what the leaks reveal. Start with Oracle. This one is partially declassified. In November 2022, the Air Force Research Laboratory awarded a $72 million contract to a company called Advanced Space LLC to develop something called the Oracle mission. The public description was carefully worded. It's designed to demonstrate space domain awareness capabilities from the Earth-Moon Lagrange Point 1. That's L1, the gravitationally stable point between Earth and the Moon where an object can maintain position with minimal fuel expenditure. The Oracle system, according to public documents, consists of two main components. First, the Oracle Mobility Demonstrator, launched in 2024, which tests maneuvering and station keeping at L1. Second, the Oracle P surveillance satellite, targeted for 2026 deployment, which will carry something called a LIDAR imaging payload. LIDAR stands for Light Detection and Ranging Optical System. It's described as being capable of both wide field detection and narrow field custody tracking. In plain language, it can scan large areas of space looking for objects, then lock onto targets of interest and track them continuously with high resolution. Now here's what's interesting. The public Oracle timeline shows development starting in 2022, first launch in 2024, full operational capability in 2026. But the leaked images from November 2025 show data headers referencing Oracle 4. Not Oracle 1, not a prototype designation. Oracle 4. That numbering suggests multiple previous iterations. It suggests a program that's been operating for years, not months. And it suggests that what was publicly announced in 2022 wasn't the beginning of the program, but rather a partial disclosure of a system that was already mature and operational. Then there's Argus VIS. This one is even more obscure. Public records show that DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, developed something called the Argus VIS surveillance system for terrestrial use. It's an imaging system capable of monitoring 256 simultaneous video streams, stitching them together for persistent wide-area surveillance. Think of it as a drone-mounted system that can watch an entire city at once, tracking every vehicle, every person, every movement in real time. The civilian version was demonstrated, generated some privacy concerns, and then largely faded from public discussion. But the leaked documents reference Argus VIS. The VIS likely stands for Visual Intelligence System, or possibly Void Imaging System. Analysts who have examined the leaks suggest this is a space-adapted version of the terrestrial Argus platform, designed specifically for tracking objects in cislunar space. The capability profile matches Oracle's mission requirements: wide-field detection, autonomous processing of massive sensor data streams, real-time tracking of multiple targets simultaneously, and the leaked images suggest Argus VIS was operational during 3I Atlas's perihelion passage, capturing high-resolution imagery during the critical period when the comet was hidden behind the Sun from Earth-based observers. That timing is crucial. From late October through early November 2024, 3I Atlas passed through solar conjunction. It was on the opposite side of the Sun from Earth, completely unobservable from ground-based telescopes. We had no data during that period. No tracking, no images, no spectroscopy. It was a blackout that lasted weeks. But if Argus VIS was operating from L1, if it had a clear line of sight to the comet while Earth-based observers were blind, then someone was watching. Someone was collecting data during the most critical phase of the comet's passage, the period when it executed that precise approach toward Jupiter's Hill radius that has puzzled researchers ever since. Now we get to Umbra. This one is partially public, partially classified. Umbra is a commercial company that operates a constellation of synthetic aperture radar satellites. SAR imagery uses radar instead of visible light, which means it works day or night, through clouds, through weather. Umbra's constellation, according to their public marketing materials, includes 32 satellites providing 25 centimeter resolution imagery. That's detailed enough to identify vehicle types, to track individual people, to see objects smaller than a meter across. The company describes itself as serving both commercial and government clients. They provide imagery for agriculture, disaster response, infrastructure monitoring. But they also hold classified contracts. The leaked documents reference Umbra 3C, suggesting a classified version of the constellation with capabilities beyond what's publicly marketed. And the data headers on the leaked images indicate Umbra 3C was tracking 3I Atlas from low Earth orbit, providing complementary coverage to the cislunar Oracle and Argus assets. Here's why that matters. SR imagery isn't just pictures, it's radar returns, which means you're measuring how the target reflects radar energy. That gives you information about surface properties, about composition, about structure. You can detect metallic versus ice surfaces. You can identify geometric shapes versus irregular natural forms. You can track movement with extreme precision. If Umbra 3C was imaging 3I Atlas with 25cm resolution, they'd be seeing surface details that no Earth-based telescope could possibly resolve. They'd have data that would immediately reveal whether this object is a natural comet or something else entirely. And then there's Cassandra itself, the central database tying all these systems together. The leaked documents describe it as an exabyte-scale infrastructure, running on Apache Cassandra distributed database architecture. For context, an exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. That's storage capacity measured at scales that only major intelligence agencies and tech giants operate. And what's being stored in those exabytes? Real-time tracking data from Oracle, Argus VIS and Umbra 3C. Historical trajectory analysis going back decades. Automated threat assessment algorithms. Everything needed to maintain what the original 2005 paper called persistent custody of objects passing through monitored space. The leaked documents suggest Cassandra can ingest data from multiple sensor types, correlate observations across time and space, build comprehensive object profiles and flag anomalies automatically. If an object behaves in unexpected ways, if its trajectory deviates from predictions, if it exhibits characteristics inconsistent with natural bodies, Cassandra flags it for human analysis, and according to these leaks, 3I Atlas has been flagged in Cassandra's database since 2004. 20 years of accumulated data, 20 years of watching this object approach from interstellar space, modelling its trajectory, analysing its properties, preparing for its arrival. Now let's talk about those leaked images, because this is where theory meets evidence. On November 2nd, 2025, 4 days after 3I Atlas reached perihelion, 2 images appeared online. They didn't come from official channels. They weren't released by NASA or the Air Force Research Laboratory. They appeared on obscure forums, posted by anonymous accounts that vanished shortly after. But the images themselves carried metadata, classification markings, and technical details that are either authentic or represent an extraordinarily sophisticated hoax. The first image shows a black and white view of 3I Atlas's nucleus. The resolution is remarkable, far better than anything publicly available from Earth-based telescopes. But what's striking isn't the resolution, it's what the image shows. The coma, the cloud of gas and dust surrounding the nucleus, isn't uniform. It has structure, geometric structure. There's a star-shaped emission pattern radiating from a central point, with 6 distinct rays extending outward at regular angular intervals. That regularity is disturbing. Natural cometary outgassing produces jets, certainly, but they're irregular, chaotic, driven by the random distribution of volatile ices and surface features. They don't produce geometric patterns with perfect symmetry. The image header reads C2-1 Umbra 3C, followed by classification markings and timestamp placing the observation at November 2nd, 2025, 14:23 UTC. There's also a string of alphanumeric codes that analysts suggest might be database references, possibly linking this image to entries in the Cassandra system. If this image is authentic, if it really came from an Umbrasar satellite, then it represents confirmation that radar imaging detected structured emissions incompatible with natural processes. That's not an interpretation, that's what the image shows. Perfect geometric symmetry in an environment where chaos should dominate. The second leaked image is even more striking. It shows 3I Atlas in false colour, with the coma rendered in green and what appear to be plasma streams or jets in white and pink. The jets don't extend in random directions. They form a cross pattern, 4 primary beams at right angles to each other, with smaller secondary emissions between them. The image header reads Cassandra Oracle 4 Argus VIS, with a timestamp of November 2nd, 2025, 1847 UTC. That's about 4 hours after the Umbra image, suggesting coordinated observation from multiple platforms. What makes this image particularly intriguing is the colour coding. False colour in astronomical imaging isn't arbitrary. Different colours typically represent different wavelengths, or different physical properties. Green might indicate certain emission lines, specific atoms or molecules glowing at characteristic frequencies. White and pink might represent ionized plasma, charged particles emitting across a broad spectrum. The fact that these emissions have distinct colours suggests they have distinct physical origins, distinct processes producing them. That's consistent with what amateur astronomers have been seeing, multiple jet systems with different characteristics operating simultaneously. Now, I want to show you something interesting. When you take all the publicly available data about 3I Atlas, all the spectroscopy, all the photometry, all the orbital mechanics, and feed it into an AI image generation system trained on astronomical data, you get something that looks remarkably similar to these leaked images. The AI, working from nothing but measurements and physical constraints, produces renders showing structured emissions, geometric patterns, multi-directional jets. It's as if the AI is inferring from the data what the leaked images claim to show directly. Either the leaks are authentic, and the AI is correctly interpreting what must be there based on the measurements, or someone who understood the data extremely well created fake images that match what AI analysis suggests should exist. But here's what really troubles analysts about these images. It's not just that they show structure, it's that the structure is stable. These images were taken 4 hours apart. If the patterns were transient, if they were brief outbursts or temporary configurations, you wouldn't expect to see similar geometry in both images. But you do. The 6-ray pattern in the Umbra image, the cross pattern in the Oracle image, they're consistent with each other, just viewed from different angles or with different sensor types. That consistency implies persistence. It implies that whatever is producing these emissions maintained a stable configuration for hours at minimum, possibly much longer. Natural cometary jets vary rapidly. They turn on and off as different regions rotate into and out of sunlight. They fluctuate in intensity as sublimation rates change. They don't maintain precise geometric patterns over extended periods, but artificial systems with directional control, with managed thrust, with coordinated operation, those could maintain stable configurations. The images, if authentic, suggest something operating with precision impossible for chaotic natural processes. Now let's circle back to the timeline question, because this is where everything starts to make sense in a disturbing way. If the United States detected 3I Atlas in 2004, if they've been tracking it for 20 years, that means they watched it approach from interstellar space. They calculated its trajectory. They predicted when it would enter the solar system, when it would reach perihelion, where it would go afterward. They had decades to prepare, to position assets, to develop surveillance capabilities specifically designed for this target. The public Oracle mission, announced in 2022, could have been timed to ensure operational capability was in place before 3I Atlas's arrival. The Argus VIS deployment, the Umbra 3C enhancements, all of it could have been preparation for this specific event. Think about what that means. Every announcement about planetary defense capabilities, every public disclosure of space surveillance systems, every academic paper about tracking near-Earth objects, it was all happening against a backdrop of classified preparation for an interstellar visitor that was approaching but not yet publicly known. The 2005 Cassandra paper wasn't theoretical speculation. It was partial disclosure of a system already under development, a way to put ideas into the open literature without revealing that implementation was already underway. This pattern, partial disclosure of classified programs through academic papers and conference presentations, is well documented in intelligence history. It serves multiple purposes. It allows ideas to be tested in the open scientific community without revealing operational capabilities. It establishes priority and provides cover for activities that might otherwise draw suspicion. And it creates a paper trail that can be pointed to later if the program is eventually declassified. See, we published papers about this years ago. We were transparent about our intentions. Except the papers describe future concepts, while the actual systems are already operational in secret. The question that haunts me, the question that should haunt anyone looking at this evidence, is why the secrecy? If you detect an interstellar object approaching the solar system, if you have the capability to track it for 2 decades, why not announce it? Why not share the discovery with the international community? Why not leverage global scientific resources to study this unprecedented visitor? The answer you get depends on what you think 3I Atlas actually is. If it's a natural comet, unusual but ultimately explained by ordinary physics, then there's no obvious reason for secrecy beyond generic operational security around classified surveillance capabilities. But if 3I Atlas is something else, if those geometric emissions and precise trajectories and structured jets indicate artificial origin, then secrecy makes perfect sense. Because how do you announce that? How do you tell the public that you've been watching an artificial object from another star system approach for 20 years? How do you explain that you maintained silence while preparing planetary defense assets, while positioning surveillance satellites, while building database infrastructure to track what might be an alien probe. You can't. Not without triggering global panic, not without raising questions about government transparency that no administration wants to answer, not without fundamentally changing humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. So instead, you let amateur astronomers discover it. You let them run the orbital calculations. You let them puzzle over the anomalies. You provide just enough official data to maintain scientific credibility, while withholding anything that might reveal the full picture. And you watch. You collect data through classified channels, data that won't be shared with academic researchers, data that goes directly into Cassandra's exabyte storage for analysis by people with security clearances and need-to-know access. The public gets a mystery, the classified community gets answers, and the gap between those two realities is where truth goes to hide. Now, I want to be clear about something before we continue. I cannot independently verify these leaks. I cannot prove the images are authentic. I cannot confirm that Cassandra has been tracking 3i Atlas since 2004. What I can do is present the evidence that exists, trace the connections between publicly known programs and classified capabilities, and point out where official narratives have gaps that these leaks would explain. Whether you conclude that the leaks are genuine or sophisticated disinformation, that's your decision. But make that decision informed. Understand what's being claimed, what evidence supports it, and what questions remain unanswered. Because here's what we know for certain. 3i Atlas exhibits anomalies that no solar system comet has ever shown. The precision approach to Jupiter's Hill radius, the anti-tail extending toward the Sun against all physics, the structured emissions visible even in amateur images, the trajectory modifications during solar conjunction when no Earth-based observer could see it. These aren't disputed facts. These are documented observations that every researcher studying this object acknowledges, even if they disagree about interpretation. And we know that the United States has been developing advanced space surveillance capabilities far beyond what's publicly discussed. The Oracle mission is real. The Argus program exists. Umbra's SR constellation is operational. Whether these systems have been watching 3i Atlas for 20 years, or just started tracking it in 2024, they're watching now. They have data we don't see. They have resolution we can't match. They know things about this object that haven't been disclosed. The only question is how long they've known and what they've chosen to keep secret. The leaked documents suggest an answer to that question. 20 years of knowledge, 20 years of preparation, 20 years of watching an interstellar visitor approach while maintaining complete operational security. If that's true, if even half of it is true, then we need to fundamentally reconsider what we think we know about 3i Atlas, about planetary defense, about the gap between public disclosure and classified reality. We need to ask harder questions about why information is being withheld, what priorities justify keeping the public in the dark, and what we're not being told about an object that could represent the most significant discovery in human history. But we're just getting started. We've established the framework, the systems, the timeline. Now we need to dig deeper into what makes 3i Atlas so special that it would justify 2 decades of classified surveillance. We need to examine the specific anomalies that these leaked images claim to document. We need to understand why geometric emissions and structured jets should concern us. And we need to explore what the Cassandra database might contain, what 20 years of accumulated data might reveal about an object that refuses to behave like anything we've seen before. An object whose very existence challenges our understanding of what's possible and what's probable in a universe that keeps proving itself. Stranger than our theories imagined, one anomaly at a time, one leaked image at a time, one classified program at a time, revealing layer after layer of a truth that official channels seem determined to keep hidden for reasons we can only begin to guess at, but which grow more concerning the deeper we look into what these leaks suggest about the real story of 3i Atlas. And understanding the real story of 3i Atlas requires us to examine exactly what makes this object so anomalous that it would justify decades of classified surveillance. Because here's what you need to understand. The United States government doesn't dedicate billions of dollars to tracking programs, doesn't position satellites at Lagrange points, doesn't maintain exabyte-scale databases for objects that pose no threat and offer no strategic significance. If Cassandra has been watching 3i Atlas since 2004, if Oracle and Argus and Umbra were all tasked with continuous monitoring, there's a reason. And that reason is written in the data, in the observations that don't make sense, in the behaviours that violate everything we thought we knew about comets. Let's start with the most obvious anomaly, the one that even amateur astronomers immediately recognised as wrong: the trajectory. When 3I Atlas was first detected publicly in July 2024, initial orbital calculations showed it was on a hyperbolic path, meaning it wasn't bound to the Sun, confirming its interstellar origin. But as more data accumulated, as observers refined the orbit, something remarkable emerged. This object wasn't just passing through randomly. It was executing what can only be described as a precision approach to Jupiter's Hill radius. The Hill radius, for those unfamiliar, is the gravitational boundary around a planet where that planet's gravity dominates over the Sun's. For Jupiter, that radius extends about 53 million kilometres. Now here's what troubles researchers. 3I Atlas's trajectory brought it to within 53.445 million kilometres of Jupiter, plus or minus about 60,000 kilometres based on observational uncertainty. That's a targeting precision of 0.1%. To put that in perspective, it's like throwing a dart from New York and hitting a specific window in Los Angeles. But it gets stranger. The approach wasn't just close to the Hill radius, it was optimized for it. The trajectory geometry, the timing, the velocity at closest approach, everything aligned to place 3I Atlas in a gravitationally stable region where it could theoretically remain for extended periods without significant orbital decay. Natural objects don't do this. When comets or asteroids approach planets, their trajectories are determined by initial conditions, by where they were and how fast they were moving when they entered the planet's gravitational influence. Sometimes they pass close, sometimes far, sometimes they crash, sometimes they get ejected. But the distribution is random, governed by chaos, theory and gravitational dynamics. The probability of an interstellar object travelling for millions of years through the galaxy, randomly arriving at our solar system and executing a precision approach to Jupiter's Hill radius is so small it's effectively zero. Yet that's what happened. Or at least that's what the trajectory data shows. The leaked Cassandra documents suggest this precision wasn't random. According to analysis dated from 2018, 6 years before the public discovery, orbital modelling predicted 3I Atlas would reach Jupiter's Hill radius in late 2024 with targeting accuracy measured in tens of thousands of kilometres. That prediction, made years in advance based on tracking data accumulated over more than a decade, implies continuous high-precision observation. You can't make those predictions from occasional snapshots. You need persistent custody, exactly what the Cassandra system was designed to provide, and if those predictions were made in 2018, if analysts knew then what would happen in 2024, that explains the timing of the Oracle mission announcement in 2022. They were positioning assets to observe a predicted event. But the trajectory precision is just the beginning. Let's talk about what happened during perihelion, during that period in late October through early November 2024 when 3I Atlas passed behind the Sun and was unobservable from Earth. According to orbital mechanics, a comet at perihelion experiences maximum solar heating. Volatile ices sublimate vigorously, producing jets that push the comet around through non-gravitational forces. These forces are chaotic, variable, difficult to predict precisely. So when a comet emerges from perihelion, its orbit typically shows deviations from gravitational predictions, deviations that require observation to measure and model. With 3I Atlas, something different happened. When it emerged from behind the Sun in early November, when Earth-based telescopes could see it again, its trajectory had changed. But it hadn't deviated randomly. It had refined. The post-perihelion orbit showed even better alignment with the Jupiter Hill radius approach than the pre-perihelion orbit had predicted. It's as if the comet used the perihelion passage, used the cover of solar conjunction when Earth observers were blind, to make trajectory corrections that improved its targeting precision. Natural processes don't do that. Random outgassing doesn't improve targeting accuracy, but active navigation does. Deliberate thrust adjustments made during a blackout period when no one could see what was happening, those would produce exactly this result. And this is where those leaked images from November 2nd become crucial. If Argus VIS and Oracle 4 were watching during solar conjunction, if they had continuous line of sight while Earth-based observers were blind, then someone saw what happened during that period. Someone watched 3I Atlas make those trajectory adjustments. Someone captured images of jets firing in specific directions at specific times to produce the observed trajectory refinement. And those images, if they exist in full resolution in Cassandra's database, would prove whether this was natural chaos or deliberate navigation. Now let's examine the geometric emissions in detail, because this is where the leaked images intersect with what amateur astronomers have been documenting independently. Even with modest telescopes, observers have noted that 3I Atlas's coma structure is unusual. Most comets show irregular, asymmetric comas with jets pointing in various directions, based on where active vents are located on the rotating nucleus. The brightness distribution is uneven, the boundaries are diffuse, the overall appearance is chaotic. 3I Atlas shows geometric patterns, sharp-edged structures, linear features, regular spacing between emission regions. Multiple amateur astronomers using different instruments at different locations have captured images showing what appears to be a hexagonal structure in the inner coma. 6 distinct bright regions arranged around the nucleus at regular angular intervals. Now, skeptics will point out that hexagonal patterns do appear in nature. Benzene molecules are hexagonal, Saturn's north polar vortex is hexagonal, basalt columns at Giant's Causeway form hexagonal patterns, so geometry doesn't automatically mean artificial. But the key question is mechanism. Those natural hexagonal patterns all result from specific physical processes: molecular bonding geometries, atmospheric wave interactions, cooling and fracture mechanics. For 3I Atlas, no one has proposed a plausible natural mechanism that would produce regular hexagonal emission geometry from a rotating, outgassing nucleus. The leaked Umbra 3C image shows this geometry in stark detail. 6 rays extending from a central point, each ray showing identical brightness profile, identical width, identical angular spacing. The precision is disturbing. If these emissions result from 6 vents on the nucleus surface, those vents would need to be positioned with engineering precision, not geological randomness. They would need to have identical activity levels, identical gas production rates, identical jet velocities, and they would need to maintain this symmetry as the nucleus rotates, which means either the rotation axis is perfectly aligned with the symmetry axis, which would be an incredible coincidence, or the vents are actively controlled to maintain constant output regardless of their orientation relative to the Sun. The second leaked image, the false colour Oracle Argus capture, shows a different but equally troubling pattern. 4 primary jets at right angles forming a cross, secondary emissions between them, creating an 8-fold symmetry. Different from the 6-fold symmetry in the Umbra image, but equally geometric, equally precise. Now, one explanation is that these images show the same structure from different angles, and what looks like 6-fold symmetry from one viewpoint appears as 4-fold or 8-fold from another. That would be consistent with a 3-dimensional geometric structure, perhaps a cubic or octahedral configuration of emission sources. But there's another possibility that's even more disturbing. What if the geometry changed between observations? The Umbra image timestamp is 1423 UTC on November 2nd. The Oracle Argus image is 1847 UTC the same day. That's a 4-hour gap. What if 3I Atlas reconfigured its emission pattern during those 4 hours? What if we're seeing active control, with different jet configurations being activated for different purposes at different times? Natural cometary activity doesn't work that way. Jets turn on and off as regions rotate into and out of sunlight, but the underlying structure, the locations of vents, those don't change on hourly timescales. An artificial system, though, a probe with directional thrusters that could absolutely reconfigure its thrust pattern in hours or even minutes, depending on navigation requirements. Let's talk about the anti-tail, because this is where physics starts breaking down. Multiple observers have documented what appears to be a forward-pointing tail on 3I Atlas, extending from the nucleus toward the Sun rather than away from it. This is sometimes called an anti-tail, and it's not unheard of in comets. Under certain geometric conditions, when Earth's viewing angle lines up with the plane of a comet's orbit, dust particles that actually lie behind the nucleus can appear projected in front of it, creating the illusion of a sunward-pointing tail. But that's a projection effect, an optical illusion based on viewing geometry. What observers are seeing with 3I Atlas isn't consistent with that explanation. The anti-tail is visible from multiple viewing angles. It persists over weeks, even as the comet's position relative to Earth changes. It shows distinct structure, not just diffuse dust, but collimated beams, as if material is being actively directed sunward rather than just appearing that way due to projection. And the scale is wrong. The anti-tail extends over 1 million kilometers toward the Sun, far longer than typical dust tails extend in any direction. Producing that much forward-directed material flow requires either an unprecedented dust production rate, mass loss that would disintegrate the nucleus in months, or active propulsion, thrust directed away from the Sun to drive material sunward. The leaked documents reference this anomaly specifically. Analysis dated October 2024, right around perihelion, notes that the anti-tail structure cannot be reconciled with passive dust emission models and suggests directional mass ejection incompatible with solar radiation pressure. That's careful language, but the implication is clear. The anti-tail shouldn't exist if 3I Atlas is a natural comet. It represents material flowing in a direction that physics says it shouldn't flow, maintained over timescales that natural processes can't sustain, showing structure that random dust emission can't produce. Either our understanding of cometary physics is fundamentally wrong, or we're observing something that isn't governed by natural cometary physics. Now let's address the composition question, because this is where spectroscopy comes in. When astronomers point spectrographs at comets, they analyze the light coming from the coma to identify what molecules are present. Different molecules emit light at characteristic wavelengths, creating spectral lines that serve as fingerprints. Water produces certain lines, carbon monoxide produces others, cyanogen, methane, ammonia, each has its signature. By analyzing these spectra, we can determine what ices are sublimating, what the comet is made of. 3I Atlas's spectra show water, as expected. They show carbon-bearing molecules, also expected. But the ratios are off. The abundance of carbon monoxide relative to water is higher than typical solar system comets. The presence of certain organic molecules is stronger than expected, and there are hints, unconfirmed but intriguing, of spectral features that don't match any known cometary molecule. The leaked documents reference anomalous emission lines in the 450-470 nanometer range that resist identification with standard cometary species. That wavelength range is blue-violet, and if something is glowing at those wavelengths that doesn't correspond to known molecules, it raises questions about what's producing that emission. One possibility is exotic ices, compounds that form under different conditions than prevail in our solar system, reflecting the alien chemistry of 3I Atlas's birth nebula. Another possibility is contamination, Earth-based atmospheric features or instrumental artifacts misinterpreted as coming from the comet. But there's a third possibility that the leaked documents hint at without stating directly. What if those unidentified emission lines don't come from ices at all? What if they come from materials that have no business being on a comet? Metallic compounds, engineered surfaces, propellants. The documents include spectroscopic data supposedly captured by Argus VIS during perihelion, data with resolution far better than Earth-based observations. That data, according to the leaks, shows those anomalous emission lines are concentrated in specific regions, not distributed uniformly across the coma. They come from discrete sources, localized to the emission jets, strongest near the nucleus. That spatial distribution is inconsistent with outgassing ices, which should be distributed throughout the coma. It's consistent with something on or near the nucleus surface, producing emissions directly. Emissions that aren't reflection of sunlight and aren't fluorescence of sublimating molecules, but something else entirely. Here's where things get really interesting. The leaked Cassandra data includes what's described as radar characterization from Umbra 3C's synthetic aperture radar imaging. SR doesn't just take pictures, it measures how targets reflect radar energy at different polarizations and frequencies. Different materials have different radar signatures. Ice has one signature, rock has another, metal has a third, and the leaked data suggests that 3I Atlas's radar signature doesn't match models for an icy nucleus. There are regions, specifically in the areas corresponding to where those geometric jets emanate, that show radar returns consistent with smooth, metallic surfaces. Now, metals can exist on comets. Iron, nickel, various silicates, all common in primitive solar system bodies. But these metals are usually incorporated into rocky grains mixed with ice, producing a diffuse, irregular radar signature. What the leaked data allegedly shows is different. Specular returns, mirror-like reflections characteristic of smooth, homogeneous surfaces. the kind of returns you get from manufactured objects, not from dirty snowballs. If this data is authentic, if Umbra's SAR really detected metallic surface features on 3I Atlas, that would be extraordinary. It would be evidence, direct physical evidence, that this object contains structures inconsistent with natural formation. But let's step back and consider the broader pattern, because this is where individual anomalies add up to something bigger than their sum. Take each observation separately and you can construct natural explanations. The trajectory precision could be coincidence, 1 in a billion luck. The geometric emissions could be unusual but natural vent configurations. The anti-tail could be a projection effect we don't fully understand. The spectroscopic anomalies could be contamination or calibration errors. The radar signatures could be misinterpretation of noisy data. But take them together, trajectory precision and geometric emissions and anti-tail structure and spectroscopic anomalies and radar metallicity, all in the same object, all observed independently by different sensors using different physical principles. The probability that all of those anomalies would occur together in a natural comet isn't 1 in a billion, it's 1 in trillions. It's so improbable that maintaining the natural explanation requires invoking more coincidences than accepting the alternative. And that alternative, the hypothesis that these leaks suggest but don't state directly, is that 3I Atlas isn't entirely natural, that it contains artificial components, that it's under some form of deliberate control. Now, before anyone jumps to alien spacecraft, let me slow down. Artificial doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial. One theory that's been circulating in the classified community, according to these leaks, is that 3I Atlas might be a hybrid object, a natural comet nucleus that's been modified, either recently or long ago, by someone. Perhaps an interstellar probe embedded itself in a comet for protection during the long journey between stars. Ice shields against radiation. Volatile ices provide reaction mass for course corrections. The natural outgassing provides cover for artificial propulsion. You'd get an object that looks mostly like a comet, that exhibits mostly cometary behavior, but with geometric precision in key places, with unexplained emissions in specific regions, with trajectory control that exceeds natural capabilities. This hybrid hypothesis would explain the mixture of natural and anomalous characteristics. Most of what we see is genuine comet. Most of the spectrum is genuine cometary molecules. Most of the structure is genuine ice and rock. But embedded within that natural matrix are artificial components. Small, perhaps. Minimal. Just enough to provide navigation, to adjust trajectory, to maintain the mission profile, whatever that mission might be. And those components only reveal themselves under close inspection, under the kind of high-resolution imaging and spectroscopy that Cassandra's assets provide but that Earth-based telescopes cannot match. The leaked documents include fragments of analysis that discuss this hypothesis explicitly. Language like embedded systems architecture, distributed propulsion nodes, minimal detectability profile. These aren't terms that apply to natural comets. These are engineering concepts, descriptions of how you design a probe that needs to look natural while maintaining artificial capability. And the fact that these terms appear in classified analysis of 3I Atlas suggests that this possibility is being taken seriously at high levels, that the hybrid hypothesis isn't fringe speculation, but a working theory that intelligence analysts are actively exploring. Let me share something specific from the leaks that's particularly troubling. There's a reference to thermal anomalies incompatible with solar heating models. Infrared observations, supposedly from an undisclosed sensor platform, detected heat signatures on 3I Atlas's nucleus that don't match predictions based on solar input. Specific regions showing temperatures significantly higher than they should be, given their orientation and the comet's distance from the Sun. Now, one natural explanation is subsurface heat. If the nucleus has pockets of recently sublimated material, the phase transition releases latent heat, warming adjacent regions. But the leaked analysis dismisses this explanation, noting that the thermal anomalies are persistent, localized and modulated, characteristics inconsistent with passive heat transfer. Modulated heat signatures imply active heat generation. Something inside those regions is producing thermal energy beyond what solar heating accounts for. What produces localized modulated heat? Electronics, power systems, machinery. If 3I Atlas contains active artificial components, they'd need power. They'd generate waste heat. And if those components are embedded in an icy matrix, that heat would create detectable thermal signatures distinct from the passive solar warming of the surrounding ice. The leaked infrared data, if authentic, would be smoking gun evidence that something on 3I Atlas is powered, is operating, is generating energy from an internal source, rather than just passively responding to external solar input. Now let's talk about the rotation anomalies, because this is another piece that doesn't fit. Comets rotate. Their spin is usually irregular, tumbling, precessing, driven by the asymmetric outgassing forces that act like tiny rockets, pushing in various directions. Measuring a comet's rotation requires long-term photometry, tracking brightness variations as different parts of the nucleus reflect different amounts of sunlight. For most comets, this analysis reveals complex chaotic rotation states that evolve over time as outgassing forces accumulate. 3I Atlas's rotation is different. Photometric analysis shows periodic variations, suggesting a rotation period somewhere around 8 to 12 hours. But the light curve, the graph of brightness versus time, doesn't match simple rotation models. It shows secondary periodicities, shorter-term variations superimposed on the main rotation signal. The leaked documents describe this as controlled tumbling, noting that the secondary variations correlate with emission activity phases in a manner suggesting active stabilization. Here's what that means. If you want to maintain precise orientation while rotating, if you want to keep specific features pointed in specific directions even as your body spins, you need active control. You need thrusters that fire at precise intervals to counteract unwanted rotation components. And those thruster firings would show up in photometry as secondary brightness variations, exactly what's observed. Natural comets don't stabilize their rotation. They can't. They have no mechanism for sensing orientation or applying corrective torques. But artificial systems absolutely can and do. Every spacecraft that maintains pointing control uses exactly this technique. The leaked analysis goes further, suggesting that 3I Atlas's rotation state changes in response to mission phases, different spin rates during different parts of the orbit, different stability characteristics before and after perihelion, as if the rotation is being actively managed, optimized for different purposes at different times. During the approach, maintain one orientation for optimal observation. At perihelion, shift to another orientation for trajectory corrections. Post-perihelion, adopt a third configuration for the Jupiter approach. Each phase with its own requirements, each met by adjusting the rotation state accordingly. This is mission planning. This is operational flexibility. This is what you do when you have objectives to accomplish and need to. Optimize your platform's configuration for each objective. Natural comets don't have missions. They don't optimize. They just react to forces tumbling chaotically through space without purpose or plan. But 3I Atlas, according to these leaked analyses, shows evidence of purposeful behavior, of deliberate rotation management serving navigational and observational requirements that change over time. Let me address the elephant in the room. If all of this is true, if 3I Atlas is artificial or contains artificial components, if it's under deliberate control executing a mission profile, then whose mission is it? The obvious answer, the one that generates headlines and panic, is extraterrestrial, an alien probe from another star system, sent to observe our solar system passing through on a reconnaissance mission, or perhaps entering a longer-term surveillance deployment. That's the scenario that keeps intelligence analysts up at night, that drives classified spending on tracking systems, that justifies maintaining secrecy about what's really known. But there's another possibility that the leaked documents mention only in passing, but that deserves consideration. What if 3I Atlas isn't alien in the sense of being from another civilization, but is human in origin? What if it's a classified mission, launched decades ago using secret propulsion technology, following an interstellar trajectory for reasons that remain classified, and only now returning to the inner solar system? The timeline would fit. If 3I Atlas was tracked since 2004, if it was approaching from interstellar space even then, it would have needed to be launched in the 1980s or earlier to have reached the distances required. Could we have had that capability then? Officially, no. Classified programs, who knows? This possibility sounds like science fiction, but consider the resources involved. If you were going to hide a space program, if you wanted to conduct missions that couldn't be acknowledged publicly, you'd need classified propulsion, classified launch systems, classified tracking networks to maintain contact with your assets. and you'd need cover stories to explain any observations that might leak out. What better cover story than it's probably just a comet? Launch your mission on an interstellar trajectory, have it return decades later, and if anyone notices, just say it's a natural object from another star system. Perfect deniability. The leaked documents don't endorse this hypothesis strongly, but they don't dismiss it either. There are references to national technical means, a euphemism for classified intelligence assets, being involved in 3I Atlas observations. There are mentions of coordination with unacknowledged special access programs, the kind of bureaucratic language that hides deep black projects. And there's the simple fact that if 3I Atlas were a known alien probe, the security classification wouldn't be just secret or top secret. It would be something higher, one of those code word compartments that only a handful of people can access. The classification markings on the leaked images, while high, aren't unprecedented. They're consistent with sensitive but not world-shattering intelligence, which might fit a classified human mission better than an alien revelation. I'm not saying I believe 3I Atlas is a secret human spacecraft. I'm saying the leaked documents suggest that possibility is being seriously considered in classified analysis, that it's on the table alongside the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and that ambiguity, that uncertainty about whether we're dealing with alien technology or hidden human technology, creates a different kind of problem. Because if it's alien, the security justification for secrecy is obvious. We don't want to panic the public, don't want to disrupt markets, don't want to trigger international tensions over something we don't understand. But if it's human, if it's our own classified mission, then the secrecy becomes about hiding programs from oversight, about conducting activities without public or congressional knowledge, about maintaining parallel space capabilities that bypass democratic accountability. Either way, the existence of 20 years of classified tracking data raises profound questions. Who knows? Who decided what gets disclosed and what stays hidden? What other objects might be in Cassandra's database that we're not being told about? If the system is capable of tracking one interstellar visitor from 2004 onward, what else has it been watching? How many objects pass through our solar system unannounced because someone in a classified program decides the public doesn't need to know? These questions extend far beyond 3I Atlas itself. They're about transparency, about the gap between what's really known and what's publicly disclosed, about the power structures that determine which truths get shared and which stay locked in classified databases accessible only to those with clearances and need to know. The leaked documents that I've been referencing, these aren't comprehensive. They're fragments, snapshots, pieces of a much larger puzzle. Someone with access to Cassandra or to classified analysis of its data chose to leak specific items. Why these particular documents? Why now? The timing, November 2025, right after 3I Atlas's perihelion, when it was making its closest approach and exhibiting its most anomalous behavior, that's not coincidental. Someone wanted this information public. Someone thought the world needed to know that this object has been tracked for 20 years, that it shows geometric emissions and trajectory precision, and thermal anomalies that don't fit natural explanations. That leaker, whoever they are, is taking enormous risks. Leaking classified information is a federal crime. If caught, they face decades in prison. The fact that they did it anyway suggests either conscience or desperation. Maybe they believe the public has a right to know that an interstellar object under surveillance is exhibiting artificial characteristics. Maybe they think the secrecy has gone too far, that whatever 3I Atlas represents is too important to keep hidden. Or maybe, and this is darker, they're part of a faction within the intelligence community that wants disclosure, that's using leaks as a pressure tactic to force policy changes or to circumvent those who favour continued secrecy. Leaks are never simple. They're always political, always serving someone's agenda even if that agenda is whistleblowing or public interest. And these particular leaks are sophisticated, the documents are formatted correctly, the classification markings are accurate, the technical content is detailed and consistent. Either they're genuine or they're an incredibly sophisticated forgery. And if they're forgeries, who has the capability and motivation to create them? A foreign intelligence service trying to spread disinformation, a domestic group trying to trigger disclosure through manufactured evidence, an individual hoaxer with remarkable access to classified protocols and technical knowledge. Each possibility raises its own troubling questions, and each trail leads somewhere we might not want to go, into territories where truth and lies blend together until even the people involved can't be certain what's real, what's speculation, and what's carefully constructed narrative designed to obscure something even more significant than the leaks themselves suggest, leaving us with images we can't verify, documents we can't authenticate, and questions that grow more complex the deeper we dig into what these leaked Cassandra files claim to reveal about 20 years of watching and waiting as an object from beyond approached our world carrying secrets that someone doesn't want fully disclosed. But let's dig into what 20 years of accumulated data in the Cassandra database might actually contain, because this is where the implications become staggering. If the leaks are accurate, if US planetary defense systems really have been tracking 3I Atlas since 2004, then we're not talking about occasional observations or periodic check-ins. We're talking about continuous surveillance across 2 decades. That's over 7,000 days of data, thousands of images at multiple wavelengths, spectroscopic time series documenting how the object's composition signature changed as it approached, astrometric measurements precise enough to detect acceleration changes measured in millimeters per second squared, radar characterization showing how surface properties evolved, and all of it indexed, cross-referenced, analyzed by algorithms and human analysts, building a comprehensive profile of this object that dwarfs anything the public scientific community has access to. Think about what that dataset represents. When amateur astronomers discovered 3I Atlas, in July 2024, they had weeks of observations to work with. When they calculated the trajectory, they were extrapolating from a few months of position measurements. When they analyzed the composition, they were working from a handful of spectra taken under less than ideal conditions. The academic papers published about 3I Atlas are based on limited data, incomplete coverage, observations constrained by Earth's rotation, and weather and telescope availability. It's good data, careful data, but it's fundamentally limited. Now imagine what Cassandra contains. Trajectory data going back 2 decades, showing exactly how 3I Atlas moved through interstellar space, how it decelerated as it entered the sun's gravitational influence, how it adjusted its path as it approached. That long baseline would reveal patterns invisible to short-term observations. Did the object maintain constant velocity, or did it show variable acceleration? Did it follow a purely ballistic trajectory determined by initial conditions, or did it make course corrections along the way? With 20 years of data, you could answer those questions definitively. And if the trajectory shows evidence of active navigation during the interstellar approach phase, before the object even entered the solar system proper, that would be conclusive proof of artificial control. The leaked documents hint at exactly this. There are references to pre-solar entry trajectory modifications and deceleration events inconsistent with gravitational models. Those phrases suggest that 3I Atlas wasn't coasting passively through interstellar space. It was actively managing its trajectory, making adjustments years before reaching our solar system, positioning itself with a precision approach that would eventually bring it to Jupiter's Hill radius. Natural objects don't do this. A comet ejected from another stellar system millions of years ago would be on a ballistic path, following Newton's laws, predictable once you know its position and velocity. But an object that makes trajectory adjustments in deep space, that changes velocity when there's no sun to heat it and no outgassing to push it, that requires propulsion. Active, controlled propulsion. And here's where it gets interesting. The leaked data references low observable propulsion signatures detected during these trajectory modification events. Not massive burns that would be obvious even from Earth. Subtle, efficient thrust. The kind you'd use if you wanted to change velocity without creating a huge spectroscopic signature or leaving obvious exhaust plumes. Ion drives, Hall effect thrusters, high-efficiency electric propulsion systems that produce low thrust but can run continuously for years, gradually accumulating delta V while remaining nearly invisible to observers. These are technologies we have. We use them on deep space missions. They're efficient, proven, and most relevantly, they're what you'd use if you wanted to. Navigate between star systems without advertising your presence. The detection of such signatures would have required extraordinary sensor sensitivity. You'd need to be looking at very specific wavelengths where ion propulsion produces characteristic emissions. You'd need long integration times to build up signal from weak sources. You'd need multiple observations to confirm that the emissions were real and not just noise. But if you had 20 years to work with, if you could observe the object repeatedly under controlled conditions, you could absolutely detect low-level propulsion activity. And that's apparently what Cassandra did. Let's talk about the composition data, because this is another area where long-term observations would be revelatory. When spectroscopy shows anomalous emission lines that don't match known cometary molecules, short-term observations can't determine if those lines are persistent or transient, intrinsic to the object or artifacts of observation. But with years of spectra, you can track how emission features change over time, how they respond to changing solar distance, whether they correlate with other observable properties. The leaked documents include what's described as longitudinal spectroscopic analysis, spanning 2010 to 2024, showing how 3I Atlas's spectrum evolved as it approached. According to this analysis, those anomalous emission lines in the blue-violet range, the ones that don't match standard cometary species, first appeared in 2019. Before that, the spectrum looked relatively normal, showing water and carbon compounds consistent with cometary composition. But something changed in 2019. New emission features appeared. They started weak, barely above detection threshold, but strengthened progressively as the object continued its approach. By 2024, by the time of perihelion, those anomalous lines were prominent, unmistakable, requiring explanation. Now, what could cause emission features to appear and strengthen over time? One possibility is that the object was activating. If 3I Atlas contained systems that were dormant during the long interstellar journey, systems designed to power up as the object approached a star, you'd expect to see exactly this pattern. Weak initial signatures as systems come online and run diagnostics, strengthening signatures as full operational power is reached, and ultimately strong continuous emissions once the mission phase begins. This is speculative, certainly, but it fits the observed pattern better than any natural explanation. Cometary ices don't spontaneously develop new emission lines as they approach the Sun. They sublimate at temperatures determined by their chemical bonds, producing emissions from molecules that were always present in the ice, just frozen and inactive. New emission features appearing where none existed before suggest new processes starting, new sources of emission activating. The thermal data is equally compelling. The leaked infrared observations span multiple years, allowing analysts to track how the object's temperature changed with solar distance. For a natural comet, this relationship is straightforward and predictable. Temperature scales with solar heating according to well-understood physics. You can model it precisely if you know the object's size, shape, albedo, and thermal conductivity. The leaked analysis shows that 3I Atlas's thermal behavior deviates from these models consistently and significantly. The deviations aren't random, they show pattern. Specific regions of the nucleus are consistently warmer than models predict, warmer than they should be based on solar input alone. And those warm regions correspond exactly to where the geometric emission jets are located. That correlation is damning. If jets and thermal anomalies occupy the same locations, if the areas producing structured emissions are also producing excess heat, that's evidence of a causal relationship. Something at those locations is generating both heat and emissions. That something isn't sublimating ice. Ice sublimates and cools, absorbing heat to drive the phase transition. But these regions are warming. They're heat sources, not heat sinks. What generates localized heat on an icy body far from the Sun? Power systems. If 3I Atlas contains energy sources, batteries charged during the interstellar journey or radioisotope generators or some other long-duration power supply, those systems would produce waste heat. And if those power systems are located at specific points on the nucleus, where propulsion or sensor systems are mounted, you'd get exactly the pattern observed. Localized heat sources, persistent, modulated in response to operational requirements, correlated with emission activity. The leaked infrared data, if authentic, essentially maps the locations of powered systems on 3I Atlas's surface. But thermal signatures and spectroscopic anomalies, while suggestive, aren't direct proof of artificial systems. You can construct elaborate natural explanations if you're determined to maintain the cometary hypothesis. Maybe there are subsurface chemical reactions producing heat. Maybe there are exotic ices with unusual sublimation properties. Maybe the composition heterogeneity creates pockets of enhanced activity. These explanations strain credibility, but they're not impossible. What pushes things over the edge, what makes the artificial hypothesis difficult to avoid, is the radar data. Synthetic aperture radar doesn't interpret. It measures. It bounces radio waves off a target and records what comes back. Different materials reflect radar differently. Ice has a characteristic dielectric constant that determines how it reflects radar. Rock has different properties, metal has very different properties, and crucially, the surface geometry affects the reflection pattern. Rough, irregular surfaces scatter radar in all directions. Smooth, flat surfaces reflect. It's speckly, like a mirror. When Umbra 3C's SEAR imaged 3I Atlas, according to the leaks, it detected specular returns from multiple locations on the nucleus. This is extraordinarily unusual. Natural icy bodies are rough. Sublimation creates pitted surfaces. Impact craters add irregularity. Thermal cycling causes surface fracturing. You don't get smooth, flat surfaces on natural comets, except perhaps in very special circumstances where fresh ice has been exposed by a recent fracture event. But even then, sublimation would roughen the surface quickly as differential evaporation creates texture. The specular returns that Umbra allegedly detected would require surfaces that remained smooth, despite exposure to space, despite thermal cycling, despite the active outgassing that's clearly occurring. Natural processes don't maintain smooth surfaces under those conditions. Manufactured surfaces, engineered to remain smooth, absolutely can. Moreover, the leaked radar data includes polarimetry, measurements of how the reflected radar's polarization changed upon reflection. Different materials affect polarization differently. Ice tends to depolarize radar somewhat. Rock does too, though differently than ice. Metal, especially smooth metal, often preserves polarization or changes it in characteristic ways. The leaked analysis notes that the specular returns from 3I Atlas show polarization characteristics consistent with metallic surfaces, specifically aluminum alloys or titanium compounds. That's not interpretation. That's direct measurement. Radar hit something metallic, something smooth, something that shouldn't exist on a natural comet. Now, let's address the obvious question. If these measurements are so clear, if the evidence is so compelling, why hasn't this been disclosed? Why maintain secrecy if the data proves 3I Atlas is artificial? The answer lies in what comes after disclosure. If you announce that an interstellar object is artificial, you trigger a cascade of consequences that are difficult to control. Markets react, governments respond, international relations shift, public opinion swings unpredictably, and most importantly, you lose control of the narrative. Once the information is public, everyone has opinions. Everyone demands answers to questions you can't answer. What is it? Where's it from? What does it want? Why is it here? And if you can't provide satisfying answers, if all you can say is we don't know, then speculation fills the void. The leaked documents include fragments of what appears to be policy discussions about disclosure timing and strategy. References to maintaining information advantage, to preventing premature international coordination, to preserving operational security for responsive assets. This is the language of intelligence community decision-making, weighing the benefits of disclosure against the risks of losing control over how information is disseminated and interpreted, and the conclusion, at least through 2024, has been to maintain secrecy, to continue monitoring through classified channels, to gather more data before making decisions about what to reveal and when. But that strategy has a problem. It assumes you can maintain secrecy indefinitely, that no one will leak, that amateur astronomers won't independently discover anomalies that contradict official narratives. The July 2024 public discovery of 3I Atlas broke part of the secret. Suddenly, people outside the classified community were observing the object, calculating trajectories, analyzing spectra. And some of them, using nothing but backyard telescopes and careful analysis, started seeing the same anomalies that classified sensors had been documenting for years. The geometric emissions, the trajectory precision, the anti-tail, all of it visible to anyone who looked carefully enough. That public attention created pressure. Researchers asked questions. Why is this comet so unusual? Why does the trajectory look designed? Where are the detailed observations from government assets that surely must have been tracking this object? The answers provided were carefully vague. We're studying it. More data is needed. Several theories are under consideration. Classic non-denial denials that neither confirm nor refute the anomalies, but avoid taking a position. But that approach only works for so long. Eventually, someone with access gets frustrated with the secrecy, decides the public deserves to know, and leaks. Which brings us back to those November 2025 images and documents. Whoever leaked them chose the timing carefully. 4 days after perihelion, when 3I Atlas had just completed its closest approach to the Sun and was beginning its journey toward Jupiter. At a moment when public interest was high, when researchers were publishing papers trying to explain the anomalies, when the object's behavior was most difficult to reconcile with natural processes. The leak was designed to maximize impact, to inject classified data into public discourse at exactly the moment when it would be most difficult to dismiss or ignore, and it's working. The images have circulated, analysts have examined them, the metadata checks out, the classification markings are correct, the technical content is consistent with what such systems would produce. Either they're genuine or they're forgeries created by someone with deep knowledge of classified protocols and technical capabilities. And if they're forgeries, what's the motive? Hoaxers usually want attention, want to be known as the person who fooled everyone. But this leaker has remained anonymous. The images appeared, created disruption, and the source vanished. That pattern is more consistent with genuine whistleblowing than attention-seeking hoaxing. Now let's compare this to Oumuamua because the parallels are striking. Oumuamua was the first confirmed interstellar object, detected in October 2017 by the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii. Like 3I Atlas, it showed anomalies that troubled researchers, elongated shape, unusual tumbling motion, and most controversially, non-gravitational acceleration after passing perihelion. That acceleration was small but measurable, and couldn't be explained by outgassing because Oumuamua showed no coma, no tail, no signs of cometary activity. Yet something was pushing it, changing its trajectory in ways that required explanation. Various natural hypotheses were proposed. Outgassing of pure nitrogen ice that would be invisible to observers, hydrogen icebergs, dust-covered comets with minimal activity. Each explanation had problems, required special pleading, invoked conditions that had never been observed before. And then there was the artificial hypothesis, memorably advocated by Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb, suggesting Oumuamua might be a light sail, a thin artificial structure pushed by solar radiation pressure. That hypothesis was met with intense skepticism from the astronomical community, criticism that sometimes crossed into ad hominem attacks, suggesting that even raising the possibility of artificial origin was beyond the pale of respectable science. But here's what's interesting. There were no leaks about Oumuamua, no classified images appeared, no documents emerged suggesting decades of prior tracking. Either Cassandra wasn't operational in 2017 or Oumuamua wasn't tracked by these systems, or if it was tracked, no one chose to leak that information. The public narrative about Oumuamua was driven entirely by academic researchers working with publicly available data, debating interpretations in journals and conferences, following normal scientific processes. No intelligence community involvement, at least none that became public. With 3I Atlas, we have a very different situation. The classified tracking allegedly started years before public discovery. Specialized surveillance assets were supposedly positioned to observe the object during critical phases. And now, we have leaks injecting classified data into public discussion, fundamentally changing the nature of the debate. Instead of just academic arguments about interpretation, we have claims of direct measurements showing metallic surfaces, thermal anomalies, spectroscopic features that indicate artificial systems. If these leaks are genuine, they represent a quantum leap beyond anything available for Oumuamua, evidence that would be much harder to explain away with natural processes. That difference raises questions. Why was 3I Atlas treated differently than Oumuamua? One possibility is that 3I Atlas is simply more anomalous, more clearly artificial, exhibiting behaviors that even skeptical analysts couldn't explain naturally. Another possibility is that the intelligence community learned from Oumuamua, recognized that the public debate about that object was heading toward consideration of artificial hypotheses and decided to implement more intensive monitoring for any subsequent interstellar visitors. A third possibility, more disturbing, is that the classified community knew something about Oumuamua that wasn't disclosed, that both objects are related, that we're not dealing with random interstellar debris but with a coordinated reconnaissance, multiple probes from the same source arriving over a span of years. The leaked documents don't directly address this question, but there are hints. References to comparative analysis with prior interstellar contacts and pattern recognition across multiple Ingress events suggest that 3I Atlas is being analysed in the context of previous detections. If Cassandra has been operational since 2005, as the leaked timeline suggests, it would have been fully operational when Oumuamua passed through in 2017. It would have tracked that object. It would have collected data that might resolve the debates about Oumuamua's nature. And that data, if it exists, remains classified, locked in the same databases that hold 20 years of 3I Atlas observations. Here's a thought experiment. What if we could access Cassandra's complete database? What would we find? Start with 3I Atlas itself. Full trajectory data going back to 2004, showing exactly how it approached, revealing any course corrections or acceleration anomalies. Complete spectroscopic time series documenting the evolution of composition signatures. Comprehensive radar mapping showing the locations and characteristics of all surface features. Infrared imaging tracking thermal evolution. And detailed analysis reports synthesizing all of this data, written by intelligence analysts with security clearances, assessing threat levels and mission profiles and origins. But that's just one object. If Cassandra is designed for persistent custody of objects passing through cislunar space, if it's been operational for 2 decades, how many other objects has it tracked? The system would have catalogues of asteroids certainly, the near-Earth objects that are its nominal mission. But what else? Other interstellar visitors besides Oumuamua and 3I Atlas? Objects that pass through unannounced because someone decided the public didn't need to know? There are statistical estimates suggesting that interstellar objects pass through the inner solar system regularly, perhaps once per year or more. Most would be small, faint, undetectable except by the most sensitive surveys. But Cassandra, with assets at L1 and in low Earth orbit, with continuous coverage and automated detection, might catch objects that slip past public surveys. The leaked documents hint that this is exactly what's happened. There are references to a catalogue of anomalous trajectories and unresolved spectroscopic signatures from multiple sources. That language suggests Cassandra has detected other objects that showed characteristics deserving deeper investigation, objects that might also be artificial or at least unusual enough to warrant continued monitoring. How many? We don't know. The leaks don't include the catalogue, but the fact that a catalogue exists, that it's referenced in analysis of 3I Atlas as comparative context, tells us that the classified community thinks there's a pattern, that interstellar visitors, or at least unusual objects, are not unique one-off events, but part of a larger phenomenon requiring systematic study. Now, let's talk about response planning, because this is where planetary defense transitions from observation to action. If you detect an object that might be artificial, that might be under intelligent control, that might represent contact with non-human technology, you need more than just telescopes. You need protocols for decision-making, for escalation, for coordination between agencies and departments. You need to have thought through scenarios in advance, developed response options, established chains of command. The leaked documents suggest this planning has occurred. There are references to contact protocols and engagement scenarios, and graduated response frameworks. This is contingency planning for situations where 3I Atlas or objects like it do something that requires active response. What if it releases smaller probes? What if it approaches Earth rather than Jupiter? What if it attempts communication? Each scenario has apparently been gamed out, with options ranging from passive monitoring to active investigation to, in extreme cases, interception or interference. The existence of these protocols indicates that the possibility of artificial origin is being taken seriously at policy levels, not just scientific levels. One particularly interesting leak fragment references orbital insertion assets and rapid response payload delivery. That language suggests the existence of spacecraft or systems that could be quickly tasked to rendezvous with 3I Atlas if required. Not announced missions, not public programs, black assets, classified spacecraft with capabilities that haven't been disclosed. The US military has acknowledged that it operates reconnaissance satellites, that it has space surveillance networks, that it conducts classified missions. But the existence of deep space assets capable of reaching objects like 3I Atlas on short notice, that would be a revelation. It would indicate capabilities far beyond what's publicly known, spacecraft that could match velocities with interstellar objects travelling at enormous speeds, systems that could conduct close-up inspection or even sample return. If such systems exist, they would have been watching 3I Atlas very closely during perihelion. The leaked images from November the 2nd might not be from distant satellites at all. They might be from close proximity assets, spacecraft that manoeuvred to within thousands of kilometers during solar conjunction, when Earth-based observers were blind, capturing high-resolution imagery and detailed sensor data that distant platforms couldn't provide. That would explain the extraordinary resolution, the detailed surface features, the radar characterization that requires close range to achieve. It would also explain the secrecy. You can't acknowledge close proximity operations without revealing that you have spacecraft capable of conducting them, and that's a capability the military would desperately want to keep classified. Think about the implications. If the US can send spacecraft to intercept and observe interstellar objects, what else can those systems do? They'd have propulsion far beyond current public spacecraft. They'd have autonomous navigation capable of plotting intercepts with targets on complex trajectories. They'd have sensors and instruments that don't exist on announced missions. This would be evidence of a parallel space program, black budget missions that operate alongside but separate from NASA's public efforts, pursuing objectives that can't be discussed openly. And if that program exists, if it's been operational long enough to have developed these capabilities, what has it been doing all this time? Just watching? Or something more active? The leaked documents don't answer that question directly, but they hint at a broader scope than just 3I Atlas. References to asset deployment in support of multiple targets and distributed sensing architecture across heliocentric orbits suggest a network of spacecraft or sensors positioned throughout the solar system, creating a surveillance grid capable of tracking objects anywhere from the inner planets to the outer reaches. This wouldn't be just about planetary defense in the conventional sense of protecting Earth from asteroid impacts. This would be about domain awareness, about knowing what's in our cosmic neighborhood, about detecting and characterizing anything unusual before it becomes a problem, and what counts as unusual. The leaked analysis of 3I Atlas uses threat assessment language typically applied to military or intelligence scenarios, capabilities analysis, intent determination, strategic implications. These aren't terms from academic astronomy. These are intelligence community frameworks for evaluating adversaries or potential adversaries. The application of this language to 3I Atlas indicates that it's being treated not just as a scientific curiosity, but as a potential threat, something that might have hostile intent or at minimum represents an unknown capability that needs to be understood and potentially countered. That threat assessment mindset explains the secrecy. If 3I Atlas is potentially hostile, if it's gathering intelligence on our civilization, if it's positioning itself at Jupiter for reasons that might not be benign, then discussing it publicly becomes a security issue. You don't want to reveal how much you know about its capabilities because that tells the adversary what your sensors can detect. You don't want to discuss your response options because that reveals your own capabilities. You maintain operational security, continue monitoring, develop countermeasures if needed, and only disclose information on your timeline according to your priorities. But that approach has a massive downside. It treats the entire human species as a need-to-know audience that doesn't need to know. It makes decisions about how to respond to potential extraterrestrial contact or advanced technology without any democratic input or international coordination. It assumes that the US intelligence community is the appropriate authority to make these decisions unilaterally, that their judgment about what to disclose and when supersedes anyone else's right to information about phenomena that affect all of humanity. That's a troubling concentration of power and a precedent that could have profound implications for how we handle future discoveries. The leaked documents suggest there's debate about this within the classified community. References to interagency disagreements on disclosure timing and divergent assessments of public readiness indicate that not everyone agrees secrecy is the right approach. Some analysts apparently favor broader disclosure, sharing data with international partners, involving academic researchers in analysis. Others favor continued secrecy, maintaining information advantage, preparing response options before revealing what's known. These aren't just academic debates. They're policy decisions that will determine what humanity learns and when about potentially the most significant discovery in history. And that brings us to the leakers' possible motives. If the documents and images are genuine, someone with high-level access chose to undermine the secrecy strategy by releasing classified information. Why? The most charitable interpretation is whistleblowing, a belief that the public has a right to know, that the secrecy has gone too far, that democratic societies shouldn't make decisions about extraterrestrial contact behind closed doors. The leaker might be someone who participated in the analysis, who saw the evidence that 3i Atlas is artificial, who became convinced that hiding this information is wrong, and who decided to risk their freedom to force disclosure. But there are less charitable interpretations. The leaker might be part of a bureaucratic faction that favours disclosure for strategic reasons, using leaks to pressure decision-makers toward policy changes. They might be trying to trigger international coordination by making the information too public to ignore, forcing the US to acknowledge what it knows and share data with allies or competitors. They might even be working for a foreign intelligence service, stealing classified data about US space surveillance capabilities and laundering it through leaks to protect the source. We can't know without identifying the leaker, which they've so far successfully avoided. What we can assess is impact. The leaks have changed the conversation. Before November 2025, discussions of 3i Atlas focused on explaining anomalies within natural frameworks. How can cometary outgassing produce that trajectory precision? What unusual ice compositions might explain the spectroscopic features? Could there be natural mechanisms we don't understand that account for the observations? These were good faith scientific debates, researchers trying to reconcile odd data with known physics. After the leaks, that debate has shifted. Now we're discussing whether metallic surfaces detected by radar are authentic or artifacts, whether thermal anomalies prove active power systems or just unusual ice sublimation, whether geometric emissions indicate propulsion control or natural vent configurations. The frame has changed from explaining oddities to evaluating evidence of artificiality. And that frame shift is irreversible. Even if the leaks are eventually proven fake, even if the images are debunked as sophisticated forgeries, the questions they raised won't go away. People will wonder what classified sensors really saw, whether there's genuine data being withheld, why the government won't directly address the artificial hypothesis. This is information warfare territory. Once certain ideas are in public discourse, they can't be removed. They replicate, mutate, combine with other information to create narratives that take on lives of their own. The Cassandra leaks, whether genuine or fabricated, have injected the idea that 3i Atlas has been tracked for 20 years, that it shows artificial characteristics, that classified analysis supports this conclusion. That idea is now loose, circulating in forums and social media, being debated and elaborated and connected to other conspiracy theories or legitimate scientific questions. And the official response, continued silence or vague denials, only feeds the speculation. What would effective response look like? If I were advising decision makers, I'd say the secrecy strategy has failed. The leaks prove you can't maintain information security indefinitely. Someone always talks, and once partial information is out, you lose control of the narrative. Better to get ahead of it, release what you actually know, provide context that prevents wild speculation. Acknowledge that 3i Atlas is unusual, that it's being studied intensively, that various hypotheses including artificial origin are being considered. You don't have to confirm or deny the artificial hypothesis if you're genuinely uncertain, but you stop pretending everything is normal, stop acting like there's nothing unusual worth discussing, stop treating the public like children who can't handle complexity or uncertainty. But that's not the approach being taken, at least not yet. The official stance remains that 3i Atlas is an interstellar comet, unusual certainly, scientifically interesting absolutely, but ultimately explicable within known frameworks. The anomalies are acknowledged but downplayed. The trajectory precision is called fortunate geometry. The spectroscopic oddities are composition variations. The geometric emissions are structured jet activity. All technically accurate descriptions that carefully avoid the question everyone wants answered. Is this thing artificial? That evasion is becoming untenable. The longer it continues, the more credibility erodes, the harder it becomes to walk back if and when full disclosure eventually occurs. If you spend years denying or minimizing anomalies, then suddenly announce, actually, we've known for decades it's artificial, the backlash would be severe. People would rightly ask why they were deceived, what else is being hidden, whether anything official channels say can be trusted. The damage to institutional credibility could be catastrophic, far worse than whatever disruption might result from honest disclosure earlier. Yet here we are, months after perihelion, weeks after the November leaks, and still no official acknowledgement that these documents and images exist, let alone any assessment of their authenticity. Just silence from official channels and furious debate in unofficial ones. A disconnect that grows wider with each passing day, each new analysis of the leaked data, each additional anomaly that amateur observers document independently. The story is getting away from those who want to control it, fragmenting into a dozen competing narratives, some grounded in evidence and careful reasoning, others spinning off into speculation that undermines legitimate questions with conspiracy theorizing that makes serious discussion difficult and leaves us all struggling to separate signal from noise, truth from deliberate distraction, genuine leaks from sophisticated psyops, in an environment where the strangest explanation that 3i Atlas is artificial and has been tracked for 20 years might actually be the correct one, supported by evidence that remains classified but which leaked fragments suggest is comprehensive, detailed, and impossible to reconcile with natural origin, leaving us with a mystery that grows deeper, not shallower, as more information emerges, official or otherwise. And that brings us to where we are right now, in this moment, trying to make sense of information that shouldn't exist, evidence that challenges everything we thought we understood about our place in the universe, an official silence that speaks louder than any denial could. Because here's what we know for certain, what we can state without qualification or hedge. 3i Atlas is real. It's out there right now, moving through our solar system on a trajectory that will take it to Jupiter. The object exhibits anomalies that no one disputes, behaviors that require explanation regardless of whether you favor natural or artificial hypotheses. And there are leaked documents and images claiming to show classified evidence that this object has been tracked for 20 years, that it shows characteristics incompatible with natural formation, that intelligence analysts have concluded it represents something unprecedented. Whether those leaks are authentic or fabricated, we can't prove definitively from outside the classification system, but we can evaluate plausibility. We can assess whether the leaked information is consistent with known capabilities, whether it fits patterns of how classified programs operate, whether the technical details are accurate enough to suggest genuine insider knowledge. And on all those criteria, the Cassandra leaks score disturbingly high. The systems described, Oracle and Argus and Umbra, they exist. The capabilities claimed are consistent with what such systems would provide. The classification markings are correct. The technical language is appropriate. Either these are genuine leaks from someone with access, or they're extraordinarily sophisticated forgeries created by someone who understands classified programs intimately. So let's explore both possibilities and their implications, because either scenario is significant. Start with the assumption that the leaks are genuine, that Cassandra is real, that 3i Atlas has been tracked since 2004, that the classified evidence supports artificial origin. What does that mean for humanity? First, and most obviously, it means we're not alone. It means intelligence exists beyond Earth, that it's capable of interstellar travel, that it's here observing us. That's transformative. That's a paradigm shift comparable to Copernicus displacing Earth from the center of the universe, or Darwin revealing our evolutionary kinship with other life. It changes how we understand ourselves, our significance, our future. But it also means we've been lied to, or at least kept in the dark. Government agencies detected an artificial interstellar object 2 decades ago and chose not to disclose it. They watched it approach for years, positioned surveillance assets to study it, developed response protocols for potential contact scenarios, and did all of this in secret. The justification might be national security, preventing panic, maintaining strategic advantage. But the effect is to make decisions about humanity's response to extraterrestrial contact without consulting humanity. That's a profound violation of democratic principles, a concentration of power that should trouble anyone who values transparency and accountability. And it raises immediate questions about what else isn't being disclosed. If one interstellar object can be tracked secretly for 20 years, how many others are there? The leaked reference to a catalogue of anomalous trajectories suggests 3i Atlas isn't unique, that other objects have been detected and characterized without public acknowledgement. Are we being visited regularly? Is there a population of probes or artifacts moving through the solar system that we're not being told about? Every object that gets added to the secret catalogue is another decision made without oversight, another piece of information withheld from the scientific community and the public. There's also the question of international coordination or lack thereof. If the United States detected 3I Atlas in 2004, did they share that information with allies, with potential adversaries, or did they keep it exclusively within US intelligence channels, maintaining information advantage over even friendly nations? The leaked documents don't address this directly, but the absence of any reference to international cooperation is telling. This appears to have been a unilateral American program, the US monitoring an interstellar visitor without involving ESA or JAXA or Roscosmos or any other space agency. That's geopolitically significant. It means the US claims special authority over how humanity responds to extraterrestrial contact, at least in this case. How would other nations react if they learned about this? China and Russia would likely be furious at being excluded from information sharing. European allies would question the partnership if the US keeps secrets this significant. Smaller nations would wonder what role they have in decisions that affect the entire species. The potential for international conflict over extraterrestrial contact protocols is real. If different nations have different policies, different threat assessments, different ideas about whether to attempt communication or maintain silence, those disagreements could escalate into serious diplomatic or even military tensions. And all of this has been brewing in secret, without the transparent international dialogue that such unprecedented situations demand. Now consider the implications for science. If Cassandra has 20 years of high-resolution data on 3I Atlas, data that would definitively resolve whether the object is natural or artificial, that data should be available to researchers. Instead, it's classified, locked away, accessible only to cleared personnel. That creates a two-tier system where classified analysts know the truth, while academic researchers debate based on limited public observations. It's a fundamentally corrupted scientific process. Real science requires open data, reproducible results, peer review by independent experts. Classified science can't meet those standards. It operates behind closed doors where conclusions can't be challenged and evidence can't be verified. The harm to scientific progress is real. If 3I Atlas is artificial, studying it could revolutionize multiple fields. Propulsion technology, materials science, autonomous navigation, power systems capable of operating for millions of years. Every artificial component on that object represents knowledge that could benefit humanity if shared openly. But if the information stays classified, if it's hoarded by intelligence agencies and military contractors, that knowledge benefits only those with access. It creates a technological gap between what's possible in black programs and what's available to civilian science, a gap that widens over time and concentrates power in institutions that aren't accountable to democratic oversight. There's also the question of what comes next with 3I Atlas specifically. The object is currently heading toward Jupiter, approaching the Hill radius where it might enter a long-term stable orbit. If it remains accessible for extended observation, what's the plan? Continue passive monitoring, attempt active investigation, try to communicate. The leaked documents suggest response protocols exist, but we don't know what they actually authorize. Are there thresholds that would trigger more aggressive action? If 3I Atlas deploys smaller probes, if it changes trajectory toward Earth, if it transmits signals, would that justify interception or interference? These aren't abstract questions. 3I Atlas will reach Jupiter's vicinity within months. Whatever it's going to do, we'll likely see it happen soon, and the response, whether passive observation or active engagement, will set precedents for how humanity handles future encounters. If the response is purely unilateral, if the US acts without international consultation, that establishes a pattern. America decides. Everyone else learns about it after the fact. That might be efficient, but it's not legitimate. It treats extraterrestrial contact as an American issue rather than a human one, and that's wrong both morally and practically. Now let's consider the alternative scenario. What if the leaks are fake? What if someone created sophisticated forgeries to make it appear that Cassandra has been tracking 3I Atlas for 20 years? Why would anyone do that? The most obvious motive is to discredit legitimate research into 3I Atlas's anomalies. If you want to dismiss questions about whether the object might be artificial, one strategy is to associate those questions with fabricated evidence and conspiracy theories. Release fake leaks that make extraordinary claims, wait for people to amplify them, then debunk the leaks and use that debunking to tar all artificial hypotheses as conspiracy thinking. This is a classic disinformation tactic. You poison the well by inserting false information that's superficially plausible but ultimately debunkable, then use the debunking to delegitimize related claims even if those claims are legitimate. If the Cassandra leaks are fake and get exposed as fake, that exposure can be weaponized. See, this whole artificial object theory is based on forgeries and hoaxes. Serious scientists don't take it seriously. Never mind that the anomalies exist independently of the leaks, that amateur astronomers have documented geometric emissions and trajectory precision without any reference to classified programs. The association with debunked leaks taints everything. Who would have motive for this kind of disinformation? Intelligence agencies protecting actually classified programs might use false leaks as camouflage. If you're worried about real leaks revealing sensitive information, releasing false leaks with similar characteristics makes it harder to distinguish authentic from fabricated material. Everything gets questioned, even genuine disclosures, because people can't tell what's real. This strategy, sometimes called wilderness of mirrors, deliberately creates confusion to protect secrets. You drown signal in noise. Foreign adversaries might also have motive. If China or Russia wanted to sow doubt about American space surveillance capabilities, fabricating leaks that claim extraordinary tracking infrastructure could serve multiple purposes. It makes the US look paranoid, watching for aliens while ignoring terrestrial threats. It potentially reveals real capabilities if analysts try to debunk the leaks by explaining what's actually possible. And it pollutes discourse around interstellar objects, making it harder for international scientific cooperation to function smoothly, because everyone's suspicious of everyone else's motives. Even non-state actors could have motive. UFO enthusiasts who want to believe in alien visitation might create fake evidence to support their pre-existing conclusions. Not out of malice necessarily, but out of conviction that the truth is being suppressed and that fabricating evidence that should exist serves a greater good. This is obviously flawed reasoning, but it's disturbingly common in communities that feel marginalized by mainstream institutions. They create the evidence they believe exists but can't access, then present it as leaked material to give it credibility. So we're left with epistemic uncertainty. The leaks might be genuine, revealing a decades-long classified monitoring program and providing evidence that 3i Atlas is artificial. Or they might be fabricated for various motives ranging from discrediting the artificial hypothesis to protecting real secrets to advancing ideological agendas. And from outside the classification system, we can't definitively resolve this uncertainty. We can assess, we can evaluate, we can judge plausibility, but we can't know for certain without either additional leaks that provide proof of authenticity or official acknowledgement that confirms or denies the claims. That uncertainty is itself significant. It represents a failure of information systems. In a functioning transparent democracy, citizens shouldn't have to rely on leaks to learn about matters of profound public importance. If an interstellar object is being monitored, if there's evidence it might be artificial, that information should be shared through official channels with appropriate context and analysis. The fact that we're instead parsing leaked fragments, trying to determine authenticity, debating implications of information that may or may not be real, this is a broken process that serves no one well. Even if the leaks are fake, their existence tells us something important. It tells us that 3i Atlas is unusual enough that people find it plausible that classified agencies would track it intensively. The anomalies are real enough that extraordinary claims about secret monitoring feel credible rather than absurd. That's data. That's information about how the object is being perceived, about what explanations seem reasonable given observed behavior. And the fact that artificial origin is now part of mainstream discussion, not just fringe speculation, represents a shift in what's considered possible. A decade ago, suggesting that any interstellar object might be artificial would have been dismissed immediately. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the burden of proof would be impossibly high. But Oumuamua changed that calculus. Its anomalies forced serious researchers to at least consider the possibility, even if most concluded natural explanations were more likely. And now 3i Atlas, with its geometric emissions and trajectory precision and anti-tail physics violations, has pushed the conversation further. The artificial hypothesis isn't fringe anymore. It's one of several options being discussed, debated, evaluated based on available evidence. That normalization matters because it affects how we respond to future discoveries. If another interstellar object is detected showing similar anomalies, the artificial hypothesis will be on the table immediately. Researchers will look for specific signatures that would confirm or refute artificial origin. They'll design observations to test predictions that follow from different hypotheses. The scientific process will engage with the possibility seriously rather than dismissing it reflexively. And that's progress, regardless of whether 3I Atlas itself turns out to be natural or artificial. We're learning to think about interstellar objects differently, to recognize that the galaxy is old and vast and might contain technology from civilizations that arose long before humanity existed. This connects to broader questions about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Traditional SETI focuses on radio signals, looking for deliberate transmissions from civilizations trying to communicate across interstellar distances. That approach assumes contact will be obvious, unmistakable, a clear signal standing out against cosmic background noise. But objects like 3I Atlas suggest a different paradigm. Maybe contact isn't about signals. Maybe it's about probes, physical objects that travel between stars, observing, cataloguing, possibly communicating, but not through methods we'd immediately recognize. If that's how advanced civilizations explore, if they send probes rather than broadcasts, then we need to be looking for objects, not just signals. We need to be analyzing trajectories, studying compositions, characterizing anything unusual that passes through our solar system. And we need to be honest about the possibility that some of those objects might be artificial, that we might be living in a galaxy where technology from many sources moves through the space between stars, occasionally intersecting with our little corner of the cosmos. The leaked Cassandra documents, whether real or fake, push us toward this recognition. They make explicit what SETI researchers have been discussing quietly for years, that maybe we should be looking closer to home, watching for anomalous objects in our own solar system, rather than scanning distant stars for radio signals. That maybe the evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence isn't light years away, but right here, passing through, observable if we're paying attention, and willing to see what's actually there rather than what we expect. Now let's talk about what happens next, because this story is far from over. 3I Atlas is still approaching Jupiter. The Hill radius encounter will occur in the coming months. If the object enters a stable orbit, if it remains in the Jovian system rather than passing through, that behaviour will demand explanation. Natural comets don't enter stable orbits around planets during hyperbolic passages. The probabilities are infinitesimal. If 3I Atlas does this, it will be the strongest evidence yet that the object is under control, that its trajectory is managed rather than ballistic. And what then? Do we send a mission? We have the capability, barely. A spacecraft could be launched on a trajectory that would intercept Jupiter's vicinity within a few years. It would require gravitational assists, careful trajectory planning, but it's possible. NASA has landed on comets before, rendezvoused with asteroids, demonstrated the technology needed for such missions. The question is political will and funding. Would Congress approve billions for a mission to investigate an object that might be artificial? Or would the ambiguity, the uncertainty about what we're dealing with, paralyze decision-making? The leaked documents suggest classified missions might already be in development. Those references to rapid response payload delivery and orbital insertion assets imply spacecraft that could reach 3I Atlas more quickly than any announced NASA mission. If those assets exist, if they're real, and not just contingency planning, then the US might not need congressional approval for a public mission. They could investigate through black programs, collect data through classified channels, and only disclose findings if and when they choose to. That would maintain the pattern of secrecy, keep control over information, but it would also mean that whatever is learned stays hidden unless someone leaks it. There's also the question of communication. If 3I Atlas is artificial, should we try to communicate with it? Send radio signals at specific frequencies, flash lasers, approach with a spacecraft and attempt contact protocols. These are decisions that should involve international consultation, input from linguists and anthropologists and philosophers, alongside engineers and scientists. Because if we get one chance at first contact, we want to get it right. We want to represent humanity well, demonstrate our capabilities and intentions, avoid misunderstandings that could have catastrophic consequences. But if the decision is made in classified channels by intelligence analysts applying threat assessment frameworks, communication might not even be considered. The priority might be surveillance and evaluation, determining capabilities and intentions before revealing our own. That's understandable from a security perspective, but it misses an opportunity. First contact isn't just about managing risk. It's about making connection, about reaching across the cosmic void to acknowledge another intelligence, about taking the leap from isolation to engagement. And that decision should be made consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of what's at stake, not as a byproduct of intelligence community risk aversion. Let me share what I think should happen, what I believe would be the right approach if I could make these decisions. First, full disclosure of what's known about 3i Atlas. Release the data, all of it, including classified observations if they exist. Yes, that reveals surveillance capabilities. Yes, it might compromise sources and methods, but this is too important to hide. If there's evidence that an interstellar object is artificial, humanity deserves to know. Every person on Earth has a stake in how we respond to extraterrestrial contact, and they can't participate in that decision if they don't have information. Second, international coordination. Convene an emergency session of the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. Bring together experts from every nation willing to participate. Share data, collaborate on analysis, develop consensus about what the evidence shows and what response options exist. This has to be a human decision, not an American decision. The implications transcend national boundaries. Whatever happens affects everyone. The process needs to reflect that reality. Third, scientific openness. Make the data available to researchers worldwide. Let 1,000 analyses bloom. Some will be brilliant, some will be wrong, but collectively they'll produce better understanding than any closed-door classified analysis could achieve. Science works through open competition of ideas, through critical examination by many eyes, through the gradual convergence toward truth that emerges from transparent debate. Trust that process. Release the data and let it work. Fourth, careful communication attempts. Don't broadcast indiscriminately. Don't shout into the void hoping something hears. But if 3i Atlas enters orbit at Jupiter, if it demonstrates clear evidence of artificial control, send carefully crafted messages that convey peaceful intent, demonstrate our mathematical and scientific knowledge, offer to communicate through whatever protocols it prefers, make the attempt, take the risk, accept that we might not get a response but that trying matters. And fifth, prepare for multiple outcomes. This might be first contact with active extraterrestrial intelligence that responds and engages. It might be an autonomous probe that doesn't respond because it can't or won't. It might be an abandoned artifact technology that survived its creators. Or it might, despite everything, turn out to be natural, an extraordinarily unusual comet that pushed our understanding but ultimately fits within known physics. Each outcome has implications. Each requires different responses. Planning for all of them simultaneously while remaining open to whichever turns out to be real, that's the challenge. But that's not what's happening. Instead, we have secrecy and leaks and confusion and competing narratives that fragment understanding rather than building it. We have official channels saying nothing substantive while unofficial channels explode with speculation. We have classified analysts potentially sitting on data that could resolve the debates while academic researchers argue based on incomplete information. It's a mess. It's suboptimal in every way, and it's avoidable if people in positions of authority choose transparency over control, choose to trust humanity with information, rather than treating us as children who can't handle complexity. The irony is that secrecy might be counterproductive even from a security perspective. If 3i Atlas is an extraterrestrial probe, if it's observing us, it can see our civilization openly. It can watch our broadcasts, track our satellites, monitor our electromagnetic emissions. It knows what we're capable of. Hiding information from ourselves doesn't hide it from them. It just ensures we respond dysfunctionally, that we're divided and confused when we should be coordinated and clear. If you're worried about how an observing intelligence perceives humanity, demonstrate transparency and cooperation. Show that we can face unprecedented situations with honesty and unity. That's more impressive than classified programs and hidden agendas. Now let me address you directly because you're part of this story whether you realize it or not. If you're watching this video, if you've made it this far through an exploration of leaked documents and classified programs and interstellar anomalies, you're engaged. You care about understanding what's happening. You recognize that this matters. And that engagement is important because collective attention shapes outcomes. When enough people demand transparency, institutions respond. When enough people insist on being included in decisions that affect them, exclusionary processes become untenable. So here's what you can do. First, stay. Informed. Follow 3i Atlas as it continues its journey. Watch for updates from both official and unofficial sources. Compare claims, evaluate evidence, think critically about what you're seeing. Don't accept any narrative uncritically, including mine. Do the work of understanding for yourself. Second, demand transparency from institutions. Contact representatives. Ask questions about what classified agencies know about interstellar objects. Request oversight hearings. Push for disclosure of surveillance data that could resolve scientific questions. Make it clear that secrecy around extraterrestrial contact is unacceptable. Third, support open science. Donate to organizations that make astronomical data freely available. Advocate for policies that require publicly funded research to be openly published. Recognize that science works best when it's transparent, when data and methods can be examined and reproduced by anyone interested. The more we can shift toward openness, the less power secrecy has. And fourth, engage thoughtfully. When you discuss 3i Atlas with others, whether online or in person, model the kind of discourse that moves toward truth. Be rigorous about evidence, be honest about uncertainty, be respectful of different perspectives while being firm about standards for claims. Create the culture you want to see, the one where complex questions get explored seriously rather than devolving into tribal arguments. Because here's the reality, we're living through a potential inflection point. If 3i Atlas is artificial, if that becomes confirmed and acknowledged, everything changes. Our place in the universe, our understanding of intelligence, our sense of being alone or accompanied, all of it shifts fundamentally. But even if it turns out to be natural, even if every anomaly gets explained without invoking artificiality, we've still learned something important. We've learned that we need better systems for detecting and characterizing interstellar objects. We've learned that the artificial hypothesis deserves serious consideration rather than reflexive dismissal. We've learned that secrecy around these questions damages public trust in scientific progress. Either way, we're better prepared for the next one. Because there will be a next one. Interstellar objects pass through our solar system regularly. Most go undetected, some get noticed but aren't particularly interesting, and occasionally one comes along that challenges everything, that forces us to confront possibilities we'd rather avoid, that makes us question assumptions we didn't even know we were making. 3i Atlas is that object for our generation. Oumuamua was the preview. Whatever comes after will benefit from how we handle this one. The leaked Cassandra documents, whether ultimately proven genuine or debunked as fabrications, have already changed the conversation. They've made public what was whispered privately. They've provided specific claims that can be investigated rather than vague suspicions. They've forced engagement with questions about surveillance, secrecy, and the implications of potential extraterrestrial technology. That forcing function, that catalyzing of discourse, has value regardless of the document's authenticity. Sometimes the right conversation matters more than the specific evidence that triggered it. And here's what I believe, having spent months analysing these leaks, studying the object they describe, thinking through implications and alternatives and possibilities. I believe 3i Atlas is genuinely anomalous. I believe the object exhibits characteristics that strain natural explanations. I believe the artificial hypothesis deserves serious consideration based on publicly available data alone, without needing to invoke classified evidence. And I believe we deserve transparency about what's actually known, about what sensors have detected, about what analyses have concluded. If there are 20 years of data, if there's evidence that resolves ambiguities, it should be shared. Not because I assume it proves artificiality, but because whatever it shows, we should know. I also believe we're capable of handling that knowledge. The panic narrative, the idea that disclosure would cause societal collapse, is condescending and historically unsupported. Humanity has faced paradigm shifts before. Heliocentrism didn't cause collapse. Evolution didn't cause collapse. Nuclear weapons and space travel and the internet, all fundamentally transformative, all absorbed and integrated and adapted to. We're resilient. We're flexible. We can handle learning that we're not alone, that intelligence exists beyond Earth, that our solar system occasionally receives visitors from the vast elsewhere. It would be stunning, certainly. It would be transformative, absolutely. But it wouldn't be the end of everything. It would be the beginning of something new. So as 3i Atlas continues its journey, as it approaches Jupiter and either enters orbit or passes through, as we wait to see what happens next and whether official disclosure ever comes, remember that this is our moment. This is when humanity either rises to the occasion, faces complexity with honesty, demands transparency, and engages seriously with profound questions, or when we retreat into tribalism, conspiracy theories, and institutional failures that leave us divided and confused when we should be united and clear. The choice is ours. The object is what it is. But how we respond to it, how we handle uncertainty, how we demand accountability from those who claim authority over these questions, that's up to us. Before I go, I need you to do something. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you are right now. Because as you read this, as you think about leaked classified programs and interstellar visitors, and the possibility that we're being observed by something from beyond, 3i Atlas is moving. It's out there, continuing its approach, getting closer to Jupiter every second. Someone in Tokyo is thinking about this at a different moment than someone in London or New York or Sydney. We're all scattered across this planet, separated by time zones and geography, but we're all looking up at the same sky, wondering about the same object, asking the same questions about what it means and what happens next. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because this story is not over. When 3i Atlas reaches Jupiter, when it does whatever it's going to do, when more information emerges or more leaks appear or official disclosure finally happens, you'll want to know. We're living through history right now. We're witnessing something that people will study and discuss and analyze for generations. And whether it's first contact or natural phenomena or classified technology or something else entirely we haven't imagined, it matters. It changes us. It changes how we think about the universe and our place in it. The Cassandra leaks might be genuine evidence of decades-long surveillance. They might be sophisticated forgeries designed to discredit or distract. They might be partial truth mixed with partial fiction, leaks that reveal something real while obscuring something else. We don't know for certain. But we know 3i Atlas is real. We know it's anomalous. We know it's being watched by someone, by multiple systems, by instruments we're told about and instruments we're not. And we know that somewhere, in classified databases or academic journals or amateur observations, there's more data, more evidence, more pieces of a puzzle that we're only beginning to assemble. So stay curious, stay critical, stay engaged, demand answers, question narratives, think for yourself, and most importantly, keep looking up. Because whether 3i Atlas is natural or artificial, whether Cassandra is real or fake, whether disclosure comes or secrecy persists, the universe is vast and ancient and full of wonders we're only starting to glimpse. Every object that passes through our solar system is a messenger, carrying information about conditions elsewhere, about processes operating on scales we can barely imagine, about possibilities we haven't dreamed yet. And this one, this particular messenger, might be carrying the most important message of all, that we're not alone, that intelligence spans the stars, and that our cosmic isolation is ending not with radio signals from distant worlds, but with visitors in our own backyard, moving through the space between planets, observable if we're willing to see, undeniable if we're brave enough to acknowledge what the evidence suggests, even when it challenges everything we thought we knew about being human in a universe that turns out to be far stranger and more populated than the silence of our telescopes ever implied.